insights and analysis on the energy commodities market. Led by two industry veterans, Bill Shanahan and Brian Pieri, as they host their weekly commodity market recap. With over 55 years of combined experience in the energy sector, Bill and Brian bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the table. From trading and hedging to finance and optimization, they have seen it all and are here to break down the latest market trends and share their insights. So sit back, relax, and get ready to dive into the world of energy commodities with Bill and Brian on EnergyRogue.com.
Brian, hit to go live.
We are live.
All right. Well, mine's telling me we got a error. So, hello, folks. Bill and Brian here with Energy Rogue, and we've got with us Brenden today. And you notice that I have a dress. We're going to be talking about the tropics, so I just thought.
Oh, and remember, next Friday is Hawaiian Shirt Day.
I am ready with our own Energy Rogue Hawaiian shirt. Brian, I don't know why we don't put these out here for merch. I mean, of course, it's probably just me and you are the only ones who would ever wear it. That's probably the problem, I guess.
I think we're the only ones that have worn it.
Hey, I'd wear it too if you send it over. I love it.
Well, the one thing is when the day we wore it, we did sort of stand out in that crowd, I think.
Yeah.
Out of about 400, and everybody's dressed in business casual. And
doesn't it bother you that you have to get up in the morning and you have to put on a bunch of pieces of flair?
Not at all. I am like the Flair Meister.
All right. So what are we talking about today, Bill? What are we doing?
We're going to talk about natural gas. We're going to talk about the weather. We're going to talk about, more importantly, the correlation with them that's not just financial, but also there's a lot more to this, and knowing the nuances of the weather and what happens, which is why we have Brenden. And Brenden, we're glad you're here. And we're going to talk about how do we look at the weather and how much effect does that have on natural gas, anywhere from demand destruction to LNG ships moving to various different things. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I hope you're along for the ride. If it gets boring, over here we have comments. You can put in the comments, it's boring. So that will tell us that we'll step it up a notch. But also, if you have any questions at all, be sure and put it in the comments so that we can be able to respond. We will respond to you while we're live, and we're looking forward to that. And I see we already got a few visitors in, so let's get this thing kicked off. Brian, where do you want to start?
All right. Well, first, I am Brian. This is my business partner, Bill, and my second business partner, Brenden, because we are working on a side project for energy and agriculture markets called WXRogue.com. And that is a live website where you can actually see population weighted degree days every single day. This cycles through and it opens up for the Pacific, West, South Central, Mid Atlantic, West, North Central. We are developing a subscription product, but until there, you have cooling degree days for Midwest cities, the 6 to 10, 8 to 14. All three of these are from NOAA, as well as the total degree days for the U.S. So you can go to this website. It is completely free, and we are going to have more resources on there soon. But our specialty is EnergyRogue.com, where we specialize in energy markets. We focus on natural gas, crude oil, refined products, natural gas liquids, electricity, and we cover everything from supply, demand, imports, exports, storage, stocks, so much more. And if you are interested in our services, we have 3 levels. Rogue Edge, $89 a month. It gives you access to 150 charts for supply, demand, imports, exports, storage, stocks, technicals, fundamentals, daily email, weekly video insights, PDF reports, daily support and resistance, price, and fundamental forecasts. And then if you want a little bit more guided experience, we do have Rogue Premium, which opens you up for our Discord channel, where we talk about the markets every single day and have a little bit of fun. Say hello to the Kerminator. And this was where we were preparing our membership for the live stream today on weather. So that
you
is
saw
a
there
little,
on that right on that Discord showing where that Weather Rogue is down there. So that's another Discord channel that you can join as well.
Yes, and Brenden puts tremendous amount of effort and information in here that covers hurricanes, tropics, everything. Actually, Brenden, what is inside here?
Yeah, so it's not just the tropics, but we're also talking about temperature trends, not even just in the short term, but long term as well, heading out the second half of this year into next year. Mostly focused on tropics as well as temperatures, but we've had some conversations about other topics such as wildfires happening out in the United States and air quality with some of our folks in the Rockies. So it's really kind of an open forum. You know, we don't just put out information that's just out there and that's it. We also take feedback from our current client base, and if there's a discussion or something they want to talk about, any clarification they want, then we have a discussion in that channel about it.
You know, when you used to tell me that you chase tornadoes, deep down I always thought it was a metaphor.
I thought it was a metaphor. So,
yeah.
So
one of my favorite things to do is chase tornadoes. It's always better to chase tornadoes than to be chased by one.
If you are serious about the energy markets, and if you are serious about understanding supply, demand, supply and demand, weather impacts both of those in different ways. And this is where Brendan's expertise comes in play, because it's not about just looking at a picture and saying, oh, it's going to be hot. Oh, it's going to be cold. That's what often a lot of traders want to hear. But it's a lot more nuanced, and that's the reason that Brenden puts in a lot of effort. You can see how much depth is inside of here. So we would love to welcome you inside. If you're interested, there's information down below. You can reach out to us. So since we are going to talk about weather, we are going to talk a little bit more gas heavy on natural gas, and that is not natural gas. This is natural gas, and we have been trending up. And this is something that we've been expecting for some time, mainly because of dynamics such as this. We have been watching power and power demand in the past week. This past week, we were over 3 BCF, higher than last year. So a lot of people look at production and say, well, we're up to 103.2. Where were we last year? In August, we were at 102.5. So think about it. Power is up over 3 BCF. Production is up over a BCF. The reason that natural gas is down in the low $2, which is, in my opinion, a short-term dislocation. And just for clarity, we are not financial advisors. This is educational purposes only, and these are my opinions and my opinions only. I do provide my opinions to our service. We are not a trading service nor financial advisors. If you are going to trade, there is risk in commodity markets. So if you look at the natural gas market, we have come down quite a bit. We were, what was it, 3 something a month ago, Bill?
Yeah, I think we were in the 330s even.
Let's actually see. It was.
You're back over off the chart.
Yeah, we were all the way up here, and that was June 11th, so a month ago, or 2 months ago. I'm sorry, 2 months ago. But we are currently building back, and the reason that we're building back, and this is why we we established the platform, is so that while we're looking at supply, we look at supply and demand, and we look at the balance of the market, and we look at where demand is going, not where it is, but where it is going. And on the balance side, this is the chart that we have been watching very, very closely. And this is supply minus demand during summer injection season. And if you can visually see, we are slowly decreasing. I'm shaving off the peaks here. What our supply over demand balance is. And so when we look at that, we have a lot of people that really reference how much we have in storage. We have made up over 330 BCF since March. And that means supply versus demand is over 330 BCF tighter since March on a seasonally adjusted factor. And this is something we've been watching because we've been watching power, LNG, and Mexico exports. And really now we're looking at, okay, so power demand is up. So Brenden, does that mean that we've been pretty hot in the simplistic fashion?
Yeah, well, really, in comparison to just last year, which was even a hell of a lot hotter than it is this year, to say the least, even still, these last several months, we've been trending above normal, very similar to last year. And that goes back to January with what was a very quiet winter. So, yeah, we're certainly above normals for a lot of the country in the United States. And just to foreshadow what my conversation will be is that we'll likely see more of the same in the immediate short term before we transition possibly to late this year, early next year to something colder.
Ooh, okay. So I am fascinated. So the
foreshadowing there, man.
Well,
it's a tease.
I mean, what Brenden is really validating is there is a heat relationship to this tightening that is happening over time. Now you throw in things like AI, power demand, and our demand on the electric side is surging. Then you throw in LNG exports. And yes, we have grown on production, but that has not countered our demand reaction. Our demand reaction has set new highs, and those highs, if we don't catch up on production, this sounds unconventional with gas being at 220. I think next year we might be short natural gas in a big kind of way. And so now it comes open to the question of, I'm gonna turn the floor over and say, Brenden, so it's been hot, which has really impacted power demand, which has really helped our supply demand imbalance and really made the market correct in a lot of ways. So that's where we've come from. I'm going to go ahead and put up your screen and we can talk about where we are and where we're going, because that's what a lot of people really want to understand.
Absolutely. So what I want to do, Brian, is we'll touch on that here in a moment. But what I want to start first with, because the other question that people have aside from temperatures is also the tropics. You know, we've been forecasting here over the last few months, not just myself, but a lot of forecasters looking at an above normal tropical weather season, a lot of named storms. And so far it's been rather
I think, wasn't it like 23? Wasn't it?
I think it was even higher than that by Colorado.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I think it was even higher. So a very bullish season. Now, granted, we're not at the halfway point yet. Our peak hurricane season is in September, but we're not seeing much activity right now. What I'm showing you at the moment is really going to tackle both of those questions at once. So this is taking a look here. All these red lines that you see on my screen represents the jet stream, right? And so at the moment, a lot of our jet flow, and let me draw this a little bit clearer here. A lot of our jet flow is cutting across the Rockies and Four Corners states, but you see this high pressure here. Our high pressure is keeping the southern half of the United States well above normal temperature-wise, not just now, but the next couple of weeks, while areas to the north, where our jet stream is crossing, places like the Midwest and the Northeast, are seeing a bit of fluctuation in temperatures. Right now, we're seeing more of a fall-like feel for the Midwest and the Northeast. That's keeping those temperatures rather cool because we're bringing more cloudier conditions, more milder temperatures, and also precipitation. So over the next couple of weeks, what we expect is for this high pressure that you see here drawn over Texas to continue to amplify, meaning grow bigger, and encompass much of the Rockies and much of the southern United States. As it does so, that will continue
high pressure. Does that? Let me ask probably
Go for it.
an amateur question.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Does high pressure mean it's hot?
Yes.
Okay.
Because of the fact that we, yeah, correct. Yes.
Yay!
High pressures,
I got it right.
high pressures always are going to promote drier conditions and are going to
Okay.
promote stability. And
All right.
because of that, that quantifies more to a hotter temperature regime in the summer and fall months, and even the spring.
Okay.
So in this case, when we have high pressure becoming amplified or increasing its area, then that's going to spread the heat across a broader area, right? So
Gotcha.
over the next couple of weeks, we're going to see that take shape across the area here circled in pink. That's going to mean above normal temperatures continuing for these same areas of the southern United States, and more of this sort of fluctuation in our temperatures for the Midwest and the Northeast. Now, what does that mean?
This might be the reason that southern storage actually made up a disproportionate amount of ground on storage because their demand is that much higher. Is that seem fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And as we look at that chart that you showed back on the WX Rogue page, for those that caught it, you notice that the South Central United States was the highest CDD values. Because remember, when we talk about things like population weight, we're not just taking into account the warmth magnitude, but also the population. And as we know, that part of the country has a very high population density. And I should, the southern United States in of itself. So that, of course, is amplifying the heat for these areas. And of course, our cooler temperatures are mostly in the Midwest and upper Midwest. What I was going to say to that, Brian, is that with regards now to the tropics, what that means is right now, the Gulf of Mexico, which we were concerned with Beryl just a month or so ago, is pretty much closed for business at the moment. And why that is because despite the fact that our sea surface temperatures are really warm, just as warm as it was last year, the difference is because we have high pressure in the northern hemisphere, folks, spins clockwise. So what that does is that keeps the Gulf stable. Doesn't allow for any convection to fire off. Now, here's the thing. The question becomes now to the tropics discussion before we dive into temperatures is, well, what does that mean for the rest of the season? Is that going to be the case for, September, October? Well, funny enough to mention that, if we take a look here at our jet stream, this is the forecasted modeled jet stream based upon the CFS month to month, what you're about to see. Okay. So if we take this just into September, remember that high pressure I just showed you guys moments ago, we went from a jet stream in the month of August that has a lot more peaks and valleys to it to more of what we call a zonal jet stream, meaning it just kind of cuts right across the United States. So there's a couple of implications to that. And this kind of pattern has shown a very strong signal by our climate models, not just for September, but going into November. So there's two things on that front. The first thing is that with regards to the tropics, that actually creates opportunities for convection to fire off in the Caribbean. And if there's nothing really steering that, hypothetically, we could see another potential system make its way up towards the Gulf. We don't have anything right now, but...
You said that was in September?
September, October.
Okay.
September, October. So we don't have any systems right now in the Caribbean. Let's be clear on that. But the environment would be much more supportive of these systems because right now, guys, we're seeing a lot of our tropical systems, minus Beryl and Debbie, just being steered off the coast. And that's because of the pattern that I talked about. But what happens if we get more zonal? Well, in that case, there's plenty of opportunity for additional systems in the Gulf. So I know there's a lot of folks out there that are putting their guard down and saying, tropical season's over, it's quiet. Not necessarily. It's certainly open for business. That's number one. Number two, with regards to the temperatures, this would also imply not cold temperatures and not hot temperatures. This is mild. And why that is because we have no jet stream coming from the poles down to the equator. We have no cold air that's being pulled down. Instead, this jet stream is advecting westerly winds from the Pacific. And if we know anything about the Pacific Ocean, guys, it's mild. So if we correlate this thought to our temperatures very quickly here and look at the temperature anomalies, you see exactly that. So this is looking here at temperature anomalies above the normals using our 30-year normals. And you can see that we're not seeing hot temperatures based on that fact. It's just kind of mild for a lot of the country, not much cold to be found. And the only time that we see that cold is when we jump to the more La Nina season, which I'll talk about here in a moment.
All right. So what I was getting out of that is that while the tropical season isn't over for hurricanes, it feels like it's pushed to the backside of the normal range. In other words, what we were talking offline, how September is sort of the middle of the season, and so this means it means to sort of be pushed back into the middle to back end of the season, and so that that's
kind of pushing. It's pushing the hurricane season a little bit later. I don't remember a lot of activity normally in October. I remember a lot in September.
You know what?
If pretty bad ones in October.
If you were to draw, and I don't have this as part of the discussion today, but if you were to actually draw a bell curve of the typical tropical season, or just historically, you would see that September is peak. Right, that is the peak of the season. We're about
so you
going
got
up
August,
the left side of the curve.
Okay,
right.
Yeah.
There's still plenty, and that's why I tell a lot of folks, our members at Energy Rogue, but also everybody here watching, that you cannot let your guard down. A lot of folks looked at July. We went through June, July, and now August, and they're thinking, okay, well, where's all these storms? It's that when we were going through June and July, that's still the beginning of the season. As a matter of fact, let's not forget something. Hurricane Beryl was a Category 5 when it hit the Lesser Antilles. That is the earliest we've ever had a Category 5 ever on record, right? Wow. That was incredibly anomalous, right? So that was very, very, very early. That was a kind of storm we would expect more in September, October. So this season in of itself has been anomalous. And I still think that we are expecting to see more activity around September, October, as our environment becomes more supportive of additional storms.
All right. We do have a question. Well, First, I do want to give a shout out, Giorgio. Good to see you. You're always here. Really appreciate it. And let's see, Rebel T. Does that mean a mild or less demand fall, or a longer fall or shoulder season? So, translating that, normally when we look at, I'm just going to hijack this for a second to show a little bit of demand on when we're looking at our fall season. It really has to do with, on the power side, here's August to November. So we see power dropping off from, highs in August. This is last year. Highs in August of 44, and then we drop all the way down to low 30s. So it impacts natural gas markets significantly, seeing what that temperature. So when Rebel T, and please correct me if I'm off, Rebel T, I think you're talking about it relative to natural gas demand and whatnot. And if we have an extension of this, then we are going to inject a lot less into storage. And that means that we're going to exit the storage season. You can, let me put it to you this way. If we look at this, and this is a large portion of our injection season, which this means how much we are injecting on a weekly basis. So when that demand falls off, we put it into storage. So if we have a hotter September, October, and we drift into fall, we're actually going to inject a lot less. So it actually is very supportive for gas prices. So that's kind of, and let's see, she sees mean relative to the mild jet stream setup. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Brenden for that one.
Yeah, so, and here's the thing. If we compare to last year, guys, I mean, we saw, I would even argue, a warm, if not hot fall. We weren't really getting out of fall last year until around October. I mean, I remember, and Bill, you can attest to this from an observational point of view, but the region that took the cake last year for heat was the South. It was Texas, It was Louisiana, Mississippi, and it stayed hot for quite a while. It took until about October, November for the El Nino pattern to truly set in, to then see a bit of some relief, right? Especially as we got more rainfall and cooler temperatures. Right. This time around, and I want to be clear too, we wouldn't necessarily be talking about, I would be careful with the word hot, because again, if we're assuming this at face value, right? We have a jet stream that's more zonal. That's Pacific air. This is not necessarily a jet that comes across, say, from Baja and then moves up north, where we're seeing a lot of heat. This would be more mild, not hot, not cold, just a little bit above seasonal. So that's sort of what I'm forecasting, because here's the other thing, guys, and I won't show the text of this, but I'm going to go into this here in a moment. But we are right now in a transitional pattern towards La Nina. And the Climate Prediction Center themselves just came out with a forecast just last week and actually pushed back the timeline for when La Nina will set in, which is pushing it back from, say, September, October to more like December, January, as more of the likely scenario. And
that's a significant move.
That is, and that's not necessarily just something that they're telling me and I'm regurgitating to you guys. If we were to look at the sea surface temperatures of the Eastern Pacific, an area that really is important to understanding La Nina patterns, we're seeing kind of a laggard progression towards a neutral La Nina. We're not there yet. Are we trending in that direction? Yes. And there's a very high probability we still see La Nina. I have not changed my forecast on that at all. But what that would mean is, if we look at this chart, which I think you guys can see, correct? It shouldn't be too hard to see, but this is just the United States. We are looking here at historicals based on certain ENSO patterns. So if we're talking here about La Nina, for example, if we look at, say, the months of December, January, February, assuming that's when it sets in, historically speaking, we would expect to see the northern United States as the colder than normal temperature regime, whereas the southern United States would actually be slightly above normal. However, that being said, what I am going to be forecasting for here in a moment is Texas is not out of the woods. Remember a couple of years back, we saw those colder temperatures in Texas?
Well,
that's certainly in the cards.
And on that note, we got Scott. Hey, Scott, good to see you. Scott is a Rogue member, so appreciate you, Scott. And it's definitely hot in Texas. Wondering if that means less fronts moving through Texas in October, which helps block the storms. And I think earlier, Brenden, weren't you talking about that high pressure actually moving up? Or walk us through that again.
Great question. So, Scott, why we're not seeing fronts or much activity right now in, say, the Red River Valley, for example, is because this high pressure is sitting right over the southern United States. Okay. And if we know anything about high pressure, anytime we have a high pressure or what we call a ridge, all of our jet stream is going to ride over top of that and come crashing down. Any point where you see the jet crashing down or advecting over the high pressure, areas like the South Atlantic, the Midwest, that's where we're seeing more of those frontal boundaries come through. But because that high pressure is sitting over Texas, you're not seeing much boundary interaction. Not just that, but if you're in a place like Houston that expects more of these sea breezes to come on shore, you're not seeing that either, because high pressure spins clockwise. So all your frontal boundaries are actually being pushed out to sea in the form of a land breeze. So you're not getting any help at all. Not any from, cold fronts from the poles or even from the Gulf. But to look at September, though, what we'd be forecasting is more of a zonal pattern as we transition from ENSO neutral to La Nina over time, which does support that type of zonal pattern. And that could lead to an opportunity of some cold fronts and some more boundaries. But all in all, we're still kicking in Pacific air. It's still going to be mild. So I think there's certainly, by the time we get to September, October, even November, Scott, we may see some more precipitation chances, some more cooler periods. But overall, when we walk away from that 3-month increment, once it's all said and done, we're still looking at some milder temperatures.
So does that, when we're looking at October, because you referenced September, if you put your forecast hat on and look at October, do those boundaries soften and we're accepting more, or is it kind of pushed a little bit further into November?
It's pushed mostly in November, and these are the temperature anomalies. But if I revert back for a second and follow me here, guys, to that jet map, right? Even if we look here from September to October, our jet stream is still zonal, right? Still Pacific air. If we take it a step further to November, we start to begin to see some troughing or some cold fronts being pushed down towards the Midwest. This would be more of a La Nina pattern.
Okay.
However, what I am expecting is that this will likely be later. I'm certainly not forecasting what it was last year, where we have a tale of two winters, but
So it's going to be it's going to be hotter longer. Is that fair?
Milder.
Milder, longer. What it's saying is you're not going to have that demand in the Northeast that we always expect in November and early December, where it's so cold that you're actually starting to see that gas demand pick up. Okay. So this is what I'm seeing. This is a light demand map right here. And light is probably wrong. It's just not a heavy demand map.
Yeah.
And so
go ahead.
So that's what I'm seeing about that. However, I think what that means though, that the demand in the Texas and the South is going to be up because it's going to be hotter longer.
Yeah, and that kind of focuses in on Rebel T, and I think that's the question here. Is that going to translate to less demand? That's what I meant, guys. Okay. Is it going to translate to less demand, so a longer shoulder season? So I think if I'm summarizing this, Brenden, tell me if I'm off base. If I'm absorbing all of this, and I think about it from my simplistic natural gas buy-sell brain, I'm thinking, well, August, September, October, we're going to be still record-setting heat. We're not going to see too much storm activity until late September, early October, maybe, which means that's all very supportive for natural gas prices. But then as we creep into winter, we may see a softer start to winter demand, given that is driven by Midwest, Northeast cold fronts, because we're going to have a kind of a modest start to that. Does that sound like an accurate thought process?
So I'll even tweak it a bit and expand.
Okay.
But for August, especially was around August, we are going to be probably likely the hottest of the season for Texas and Oklahoma and the Red River Valley and some of the Central Plains, right? Because as we talked about at the top of the conversation, that high pressure that I've kept referencing is going to grow bigger in size and amplitude. And as it does so, it's going to strengthen itself and create more stability, which then leads to more heat over that region, whereas the other areas remain cooler than normal for the most part, right? So the Midwest and the Northeast, although some fluctuation there. So that's August, okay? As we go to September, October, November, that's where we're expecting more just generally milder conditions for a vast majority of the lower 48, with the exception of the Pacific Northwest. So we're not, and again, that's where I'm kind of being careful on that, because I'm not necessarily forecasting for scorching heat like we saw last year with El Nino. Instead, because we're in this transition period for the fall season, that's more milder conditions, maybe in some cases above normal, but temperatures should be mostly in check, not nearly the heat that we've seen the last few months. And then as we get to winter, which is something that I haven't touched on yet, Brian, and I think we should, we are expecting essentially right around likely anywhere between the December to February timeframe to see more of a La Nina pattern. So the CFS, which is one of our climate models, does show, rather than this zonal pattern, we start to have some troughing here, right? So what that means is our jet pattern, rather than it cutting across from California to the eastern United States, it instead is originating from the poles and bringing colder air south, which, if we revert back to our climate normals, we expect that with La Nina, for the northern half of the United States, be the coldest out of anywhere. So that's actually pretty much in line with climatology. If we look ahead then to December, we still see continuous troughing. December, January, this is all cold air being invected down into the northern half of the United States. Now, here's what's significant about this, though, and I want to be clear on something. Not only would it be forecasting for colder temperatures for the most part, but also look at where your jet stream is. We essentially would have a jet that starts out in California and then advects northeast. What that means for my folks in the Midwest, and even in some cases, the plains in the Midwest, or the upper Midwest, is more snowfall. Because if we remember the last couple of years, this area of the country and the Northeast, we haven't seen much snow. And that also goes for the lakes. Yeah, not much. So this would actually imply more precipitation, which would also be in line with our climatology of La Nina. So that is assuming that La Nina sets in around, say, November, December. Of course, the forecast keeps getting pushed back, but what we are likely to see nonetheless is for La Nina to set in right around December and February, which the La Nina pattern itself supports colder temperatures for the northern United States and also more precipitous conditions for the north. And not only that, but if we head into January, February, the other thing I'm expecting, guys, is some fluctuation of that cold to even get as far south as Texas again, right? That was a big concern a couple years back.
Ooh.
And I definitely don't think we're out of the woods with that either. So our weather patterns have been pretty anomalous as of late, regardless of what pattern we're trying to forecast, La Nina, El Nino. But La Nina, what's interesting is if we get enough cold air to advance south, there could be a period in time, a very short period, where once again, we could see some hard freezes for southerly latitudes like Texas and the south.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
But it won't be consistent. I don't think it'll be as consistent, but there will be some episodes of that.
Well, and I
So
do want to
this also
one
this also
question.
I ask a question is that so this should increase the lake effect snow, right?
Correct. Yeah, because
everything on the east side of the lakes is going to be heavy in precipitation.
I would actually, if we were talking about that, I would be forecasting for above average this year, because if we're infecting cold air from the northwest, those northwesterly winds would cross Lake Michigan, and then places like Grand Rapids, Michigan City, you're getting lake effect snow at that point. That's one of the many features and catalysts of lake effect snow is when you have wind at a certain angle with respect to the lake, that will then produce snow squalls and heavier snowfall events.
So what I was thinking about, Brian, is that the production we have in Michigan would have an effect on it because of the ability to operate in that heavy snow.
Yeah, it definitely would. So I just wanted to piggyback and Rebel T, if you can feel free to reach out to me and email me. But when we look at last year's September or October, November, September, October, you said a warmer September, October is bad for demand. Actually, if it stays warmer, that means that our power gen is going to be a little bit higher. And so with this power gen being a little bit higher, because there is going to be a lot more heat and air conditioning load, and September, October are normally when the furnace isn't on, AC isn't on in many parts of the country, unless you're down in Texas, like Scott is. So this is when we inject a significant portion, and I want to walk through this. I kind of touched on it earlier, but if we look at when our storage injections take place, it happens in April, May, June, and then you see July, it starts dipping, August, it baselines, and then it starts building again in September and October. The reason it builds is because of milder. So if it's warmer in September, October, theoretically, there's more power demand, which means we're going to inject less. So that I just wanted to explain that, and hopefully that makes sense. And feel free to disagree. I could be wrong. I always could be wrong. So
well, and also into September and at the end of October is when we go away from injection to withdrawal, and
right.
So there's always a week or two there that it slides one way or the other. We may go another week in November injecting, or we might start withdrawing earlier in the last week of October. So that's what's going to be interesting is that little transition 2-week period, because that can change that. The other thing is that the demand is always weak in the shoulder months. I mean, that's why we call them shoulder months. And so I think what this is telling me is that the southern demand might still be a little bit higher, but when we usually like to see that cold weather hit the Northeast, it's probably going to be a little bit later than October. And so, and is that how I'm reading that, Brenden?
Exactly. Yep. You hit it right on the head. Exactly. Yeah. And for the most part, I think what will take the cake is definitely the southern United States. It will continue to be. But again, I don't expect it to be as warm. We will still have periods where it is slightly above normals, as we saw in these charts. But for the most part, milder conditions, I think, will be the general theme for a lot of the United States over these next couple.
And now we're going to play a game. You want to know what the game is?
I do. Try me.
It is predict Brendan's gas bill this winter, and this is what we're looking at. So take your September bill, and you're going to double it. You're going to double it in January. You are going to see your bill on a per unit basis doubled. So let's play a game. Let's see if that happens. That's what we can do there. And if we're looking at this one. This is predicting Brian's bill. Ooh, Brian is going to go up more than double. He's going to go all the way from down here to up here. So anyway,
just to let you know, my bill this summer is already doubled. So don't.
Actually, Bill's getting the best of both worlds. He's gonna be double. So we're all gonna be double. And let's see, Rebel T. That is normal seasonality. I understand that. Above normal doesn't translate to temp that needs AC power. Translates to a later start of heating demand. Very true. Very true. That is exactly. That is true. So that is true. I see the power. Guys, I see the power demand a little bit differently, but it does translate to a later start.
Yeah, I think that something that's different though, Brian, we haven't really talked about is the volatility of what our power grid has turned into, and that's a whole nother discussion. So that's going to be interesting because when power grid's volatile like that, your demand can be affected strictly because the grid goes down. And so, right. I think we've experienced that in Texas, both in the summer and the winter. And so, guys, we have these conversations all the time. We talk about this. There are days when I look at both of these guys and why can't we spend a normal day together?
Your faith in your friends is yours.
So Brenden, man, what a great forecast there, and let us know what's going on there. I mean, some of that's forecast, some of that's education. The weather, of course, living in the state of Oklahoma, weather is like a dinner topic all the time because it changes so much. But I think it's interesting to note that as we develop this weather product that the three of us have been working on, we're developing these correlations, and like Royalty was talking about, we're trying to figure out how this temp and the prices and all this, we're trying to develop that correlation to where you're going to be able to look at a weather map and almost begin to say, oh, well, now this is how my demand's going to be affected. If demand's this, how's that going to be did? And so the other thing is that looking at that calm Gulf for the next month or so means that there'll be no shipping interruption of LNG, right? Which is something we always take a look at. And for that matter, any shipping interruption of crude oil exports, which we exporting some as well. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yep. Yeah. And hey, guys, real quickly, one thing I want to add with WX Rogue is two things that I want everybody to keep in mind if you're accessing this website. Number one, if you're looking here at, say, population weighted degree days, that is just the GFS model. Now, there is no such thing, just like in trading, there is no such thing as a silver bullet. Same thing goes for weather. There is no one model that is going to get it right 98% of the time.
That's correct.
The purpose, though, is in what we're trying to build out long-term is more of a spread of the various solutions, understanding each individual bias, and then plotting out a general statistical spread of the data. And as somebody and myself with a background in meteorology, you learn that each one of these models have biases. So, for example, the GFS has a cold bias. So when we start talking about heating degree days, we have to be a little bit careful because sometimes it can go a little bit too bullish on the temperatures when realistically, when we observe the environment of those temperatures, it's a little bit too much, right? You can clearly tell. So, by the way, with this website, we will, once we get to heating degree day season, be flipping this over to HDDs as well. and plotting those when we get to the winter season, so you guys can access those for free as well.
Brenden, real quick, let's talk about what that really means. What is a CDD versus an HDD? Because a lot of people hear that and they think, and when they talk about above normal, it's not what you consider. When weather says normal, it means something different than what we think. So let's talk just a real quick definition of CDD and HDD, and we'll get on normal the next time.
So cooling degree days is a measurement that particularly for the natural gas and energy markets, that they will use to calculate basically energy and AC usage, right? Depending on heating and cooling. So the calculation of itself is relatively simple. There's different methodologies to it, but they're all relatively consistent and have been used for a long time. But it's just meant to calculate for that area that we're talking about. How cold are we talking? How hot are we talking to the point where we're using an AC or we're using our heating, right? Depending on the temperature. Now, when we talk about normals, our CDDs are actually referring to those. So for example, I was down in the Carolinas the last couple of months. To them, 94 degrees is a typical summer, right? But when we start to look at 100 for South Carolina, okay, now that's above their normal. So whenever you hear us talking 30-year normals, or even showing the charts that I did with temperature anomalies, that is referring to how warm it is for that particular area. How warm is it for them? And that's the important thing, especially as we look at when we factor in population. Because the South Central United States, for example, they're going to be probably even feeling it a lot more when you factor in population versus, say, the Midwest, or say areas that are more rural, right? So,
if I understand right, the normal is based on a 30-year average.
Yes.
And the 30-year average is currently being used is from 1990 to 2020, right?
Yes. Technically, it would be 1991 to, that works out to, about 2020. So that's the new 30-year normals. Yeah. So that's
a change from last year. We just went over to this normal. Last year, the normals were 1980 to 2010, if I remember correctly, or 1981 to 2010.
Yeah.
And degree days start with a base temperature of 65 degrees. That's right. And for every degree it's above that, that's considered one day. Is that how that works?
Correct. So for example, if we were talking about, let's say Chicago for today, right? We have typically how it's done. You take a base temperature of 65, you take your maximum temperature that day, your lowest temperature that day, you add those two values together, take an average, and then take the difference of that value versus the base temperature. Now, some folks may do it differently. They may, rather than take the max and the min, some would argue, well, why don't we just take every single hour of the day and then average it? Either way, it's relatively close to that number. They're relatively. Okay. And sometimes, people that use these equations on a daily basis, they may not use 65. Some people have argued we should use 55 or 60. But 65 is more of the universally accepted base temperature, just because,
or at least historically. Anyway.
Correct. So there's two kind of lasting thoughts that I want to part with, at least on my end. The first one is, I talked a lot about La Nina. Talked about the winter season, that ideally speaking, for the northern half of the United States, we would see colder temperatures than normals and severe conditions. The question that I have, and for those folks that have been members of Energy Rogue watching a lot of my content, is the question becomes, how cold is it going to get? Because here's something we have to remember. The last couple La Ninas we've had have also been mild, right? They haven't been wildly cold compared to the normal La Nina. Right. That's not to say that I'm forecasting that, but I am curious on how consistent are we going to see that? Because we talk about 30-year normals, but what we don't talk much about is, what about the last 5-10 years? The last 5-10 years, even just the last 5, we have seen a lot of variability and erratic nature within our patterns, to where we're not seeing a consistent cold or a consistent warm. In the case of last year, we had 2 weeks of winter and the rest was warm, right? That was it. Right. There really wasn't much to go around. So I certainly am still forecasting for a colder than normal winter for many folks. It's going to be interesting in the next month and a half, 2 months, as we start to see La Nina play out and observe it. How cold are we truly going to get? Are we talking about a little bit below normal or colder than normal? Or are we going to see those huge Arctic blasts that bring down 30 below wind chills
So this is a chart of residential commercial demand, which is probably your biggest indicator on how much demand is happening. And obviously, when you look at this, the low months are the summer months and the high months are the winter months. When I look at this, we're remarkably flat from the base, the peaks. But what is tricky is determining how long. You can see the year before we had a wider one than last year. It's a little hard to visualize there, but you can see the width makes a big difference. And this is part of the reason that 2019, we had a pretty wide and a pretty high. So I think that, when was the last La Nina?
If I recall correctly, I can just double check here. I believe it would have been, we had 3 straight years of it. 2020, let me just see here real quick. I can pull it up right now. We had La Nina in 2020, 21, 22. Right, so 3 years of it. And what's interesting about 2019, I remember 2019. That was actually one of the coldest years for the Midwest ever. Because we had wind chills. Now, I've been in the Midwest for 27 years. That was the first time we had wind chills at 50 below. Twice, right? So that was very, very cold. So that does not surprise me. Interestingly enough, though, with 2019, that was also a year that was in a transition period in the fall, and then we went to La Nina in the winter, and then early on in 2020. So that's interesting that you bring that up.
Did you say wind chills below 50 twice?
We had 50 below wind chills in Chicago. That would have been back in 2019, pre-COVID. Yeah, that was.
But I really don't like it, and I'm not going to go.
So it's interesting. I'm actually glad you brought that up, Brian, because if we look at just the analogs of, say, La Nina and our Enzo, which is what we look at when we are forecasting these things, very, very similar trend. So that'll be interesting.
So the one thing that I visually see, 2020 had a wider, 2021 peaked a little bit more, but wasn't quite as wide. It was a little narrower.
Yeah.
And then 2022 was a real high peak, but it even got narrower. And so that might be what you're talking about in terms of it may not be as cold for as long. Maybe it's more front driven. And that's what we experienced last year is part of the reason we had our winters are getting less wide, meaning the duration, and 2023, that these just didn't get very high outside of one front during 2024. Really, this was I mean, you can see versus all of these others, that is really a weak winter. So it does seem more optimistic than 2023, but maybe not. It's going to be super cold. It's going to be cold.
Colder, but how cold?
Yeah, colder, but whole. And really, the big question, and this gets back to Rebelty, is how long? Right. If we have a delayed start, does that mean a delayed end, or does it mean just we're going to have a more narrow winter?
So wizardry school here in America?
I'll
so
the
two things I take apart from that is that, listen, I can still rock the shirt for a longer period of time, unfortunately, this year. And 2, it's going to be hot for your Labor Day cookout. So just remember that.
Yeah. I hope you still, you know what, Bill? I hope you still have that kiddie pool from last year. Still rocking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So listen, folks, thanks so much for joining. Thanks so much for commenting. And let's see, we did have Rebelty and yep, that aligns with what she was, she, I'm not sure. Why did I assign that? I shouldn't assign anything. I don't know. I don't know. I think it's the why. I think the why. Yeah. I don't know. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But
who knows the wonders of the Brian Pieri mind? I
yeah.
sure don't.
And let's see, we got Joe chiming in. Wonder what Europe and Asia. Oh, good question. Before we sign off, Brenden, can you reshare? Joe, great question. This was on our docket, but we got distracted with all the U.S. weather. So, Joe, thank you. Add this back in. So let's take a look at Europe.
Yeah. So this is now. Remember, when we talk about Europe, we're not so much. We do focus on the La Nina teleconnection, but in this case, we want to focus on another one, which is the North Atlantic Oscillation, the NAO. What we are forecasting for here over the next couple of months and what the ensembles are showing is more of a positive NAO. What that means for Europe as far as temperatures for the second half of fall into the winter, to start relatively similar to the United States, more of this milder regime. You're looking here once again at our jet stream map. This is more zonal flow for the month of September, which would be milder conditions for places like Spain, Europe going all the way east into Germany. And if we look towards October and November, very similar thing, except once again, we're seeing some above normal temperatures for a large swath of Western Europe. And that is due to the fact that as we transition to more of a positive NAO, we would see more so of a kind of a warmer temperature regime, some above normals to start. And really not much cold. I mean, if we take a look here at our 2-meter temperature anomalies, you see a lot of above normals too for Western Europe, with some of those cooler temperatures being more towards Eastern Europe for December and January. But it's more of the same. And usually when we talk about Europe and the United States, we sort of have to look at them from two different lenses because we're bouncing off of different things, NAO, La Nina. But in this case, we actually have a little bit of a similar trend happening, at least for the fall months, with some cooler than normal periods, especially out towards, say, Germany and up towards essentially like Finland and whatnot, those areas. But otherwise, relatively above normal to start the second half of 2020.
Well, and the reason that's important, and Joe, just to kind of reference this a little bit tighter, in Europe, this is actually more of a concern for me when I hear Brendan's comments there, because we're close to 88% full on storage. Now, full is a very subjective term. It's not like a container, but 88% is very high for this time of year. So Europe and the US needs a lot of demand for that LNG to keep going. Now, Asia does not have this problem. Asia, we could continue shipping there. As a matter of fact, if Europe kicks a cargo back, I highly suspect that there's Asian markets that'll pick it up. So that's my opinion. Bill, do you think I'm on target there?
You know, the thing that is different, I think, in Europe is we look at the storage and say it's higher than it was, but realize that in the past years, they've had a pipeline from Russia full of natural gas coming to them in the winter that they no longer have. And so they need their storage full. And even at a full storage, it's only 25% of their total need for the winter.
Right.
And so,
hey guys, okay. Sorry, Brian.
And so they have to have an ongoing amount of gas coming in to be able to meet that demand without the Russian gas.
Yeah, I was just going to say, guys, to add on to the question, if we are implying a positive NAO, what that means for folks in Europe, especially Western Europe, is wetter conditions, but also above normals. If we were talking more about a negative NAO, we're looking at more air that comes poleward down into Western Europe and more of those colder temperatures. So right now, at the moment, the general forecast that I have is for more of a positive NAO, but I'm not really expecting a negative one. So that would be more milder conditions.
Okay.
And above normals too in some warm periods.
And next time we have you on, Brenden, I want to hear about China and India, because they're probably 50% of the LNG export for us.
Yep.
Okay. Interesting.
And hey, good afternoon, Richard. I hope to hear from
Richard.
you soon. I hope your conversations have been going good. Joe, thank you as always. Thank you for everything. And the LNG, another last comment is, even though we are at 88% full, there are more ships at work because they've been keeping pace with LNG in service, which we had about 4 BCF a day, or 2 to 3 BCF a day of deferments of completion on LNG exports. So that means we have more LNG ships, which can serve as floating storage. So the natural gas market is getting much more dynamic. And if you are in that market or you're looking into that market, reach out to us, connect to us, because we are not even scratching the surface. And that's why Joe's comment and question about LNG is right on target, because this is what we need to track. So listen, folks, thanks so much. Really appreciate y'all stopping in. Really appreciate you sticking around. If you learned anything, or if you appreciated this, please like, please comment, and please share. It does really help. And we would like to share our message with more people, and we'd really like to connect with you. And for Giorgio, great to see you as always. Richard, great to see you as always. Joe, we will be talking very soon. I think you just texted some dates. Rebel T, haven't seen you here before, but I'm excited that you're here, and I hope that we talk to you in the future. Scott, we will be talking to you in Discord, and I think that covers everybody. So listen, that's all I had. I really appreciate it. Any closing thoughts, Bill and Brenden?
Listen, Brenden, appreciate you all the time, and be sure and check out, WX Rogue guys, because it's going to be gaining more and more information as we go along, and you'll be able to see some of that in Discord as well. And so today, Brenden, I need to go because I need to go fry some eggs on my sidewalk.
Sounds good. Well, before you do that, send me one of those shirts too. I'd really want one for the next live.
You got it. You definitely got it. Any closing thoughts, Brenden?
Other than what I talked about, I mean, expect over these next few months milder temperatures and La Nina kicking in around December, January, February. I think we're certainly in for a little bit more of a consistent winter this time around, with some variability mixed in around December, January.
Awesome.
Thanks,
well, listen, folks, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Drop us a comment, drop us a like if you liked it, or a thumbs down if you didn't, but hopefully you did. So thanks so much, and we will see you later on.